I poured millions into my husband's company to save it from bankruptcy. One night I overheard him whispering in Spanish to his business partner about the plan. The next morning he smiled and told me, "You are going on a business trip abroad to relax." What he did not know is that I speak fluent Spanish. And when he walks back into this house, he will find out exactly what I did with his empire. My name is Zara, 34 years old, and I am about to teach my husband that the only thing more dangerous than a woman scorned is a woman with the passwords to the bank accounts. Before I tell you how I dismantled his entire life in 1 week, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated by the people who should have valued you the most. The crystal chandeliers of our Atlanta estate glittered. It was a celebration for Julian, my husband, who had just been named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce. He stood in the center of the room holding court, a glass of champagne in one hand and his ego in the other. I stood by the catering table adjusting the strap of my dress, feeling less like the wife of the honoree and more like a piece of furniture. Mama Joyce, Julian's mother, drifted toward me, her church hat replaced by a diamond tiara that looked ridiculous on a 70-year-old woman. She looked me up and down with that familiar sneer. "Zara," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "Try to smile, baby. You look like you are at a funeral, not a celebration." But then again, I suppose you do not understand the magnitude of what my son has achieved. It takes a certain kind of intellect to run a tech empire. I swallowed the retort rising in my throat. "Whatever you say, Mama Joyce," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I am just happy for Julian." She scoffed. "Happy? You should be grateful. If it were not for him, you would just be another spoiled heiress wasting her daddy's money. Thank God Julian has Tiffany to help him with the real work. You just stand there and look pretty, Zara. That is all you are good for anyway." The crowd nearby chuckled. My cheeks burned. They did not know. None of them knew that 5 years ago, when Julian was drowning in debt and no bank in Georgia would touch him, it was my signature on the check that saved him. It was my inheritance from my father, a logistics mogul that built the very foundation Julian was standing on. But to Mama Joyce, I was just the purse, not the brains. I stepped forward, ready to finally set the record straight, but a hand clamped down on my arm. It was Julian. His smile was tight, his eyes cold as he pulled me toward a quiet corner near the library. "Do not embarrass me, Zara," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "Mother is just having fun. You know how she is." "Having fun," I repeated, pulling my arm away. "She just humiliated me in front of the mayor and half the city council. She said Tiffany is the brains of this operation." "Well, isn't she?" Julian shot back. "Tiffany graduated from Yale, Zara. She understands the numbers. You just understand how to spend money. Just play your part. Be the supportive wife and keep your mouth shut. I do not need you ruining my big night with your insecurities." He turned his back on me and walked straight to Tiffany, my sister-in-law. She was 28 with blonde hair and a smile that dripped saccharine sweetness. She was married to Trey, Julian's younger brother, but looking at them now, you would think she was the one married to the CEO. She touched Julian's arm, laughing at something he said, her body leaning into his in a way that felt entirely too intimate for in-laws. Trey stood off to the side, holding her purse, looking like a lost puppy. The golden child and his brilliant white savior. That was the party dragged on until 2 in the morning. By the time the last guest left, I was exhausted, not just physically, but in my soul. I went upstairs to our master suite, changed into my silk robe, and realized I had left my water bottle downstairs. The house was quiet, the cleaning crew having finished their work. I walked softly down the grand staircase, the plush carpet absorbing my footsteps. As I approached the library, I saw a sliver of light under the door. Julian must still be up, probably basking in his victory. I moved to push the door open to tell him good night, but I stopped. I heard voices, whispers. It was Julian and Tiffany, and they were speaking Spanish. La estúpida se va a París mañana, Julian said, his voice dripping with contempt. The stupid girl goes to Paris tomorrow. My hand froze on the doorknob. They thought I did not know Spanish. They thought I was just the pampered princess who only spoke But my father had insisted I learn languages to manage his international shipping routes. I was fluent. ¿Estás seguro de que firmará el poder notarial? Tiffany asked. Are you sure she will sign the power of attorney? Por supuesto, Julian laughed. Of course. She trusts me. She thinks it is just for tax purposes. Once she signs that, we have 1 week to move the $10 million to the Cayman accounts. By the time she gets back from shopping in Paris, the company will be empty, and the divorce papers will be waiting. Why, Trey? Tiffany asked. And Trey? Trey es un idiota, Julian replied. Trey is an idiot. He will never know, just like Zara. We take the money, we leave them both behind, and we start over in Madrid. I stood there in the hallway, my breath caught in my chest. The betrayal was not just emotional. It was a heist. My husband and his sister-in-law were planning to rob me blind and leave me destitute. $10 million. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought they would hear it. I crept back up the stairs, my mind racing. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was weak. They thought I was going to Paris to shop. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection. The fear in my eyes was replaced by something colder, something harder. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. But I would not fight with screams and tears. I would fight with the one thing they underestimated, my intelligence. I walked back into the bedroom, lay down, and pretended to sleep. Tomorrow I would accept that trip to Paris. But I would not be getting on that plane. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our kitchen, illuminating the Italian marble countertops that I had paid for. Julian was already dressed in a bespoke suit, standing by the espresso machine. He looked the picture of the devoted husband, holding a steaming mug out to me with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I have a surprise for you." He slid a sleek black envelope across the island. I opened it with feigned curiosity. Inside was a first-class ticket to Paris, departing this afternoon. "You have been so stressed lately, Zara," he said, coming around the counter to massage my shoulders. "You deserve a break. Go to Paris. Shop on the Champs-Élysées. Stay at the Ritz. I will hold down the fort here." I forced a smile. "Thank you, Julian. This is incredibly thoughtful." He kissed the top of my head before casually sliding a stack of papers toward me. "Just one small thing before you go. Since you will be unreachable for a week, I need you to sign this temporary power of attorney, just so I can handle payroll and vendor payments while you are gone. Just standard procedure." I looked down at the document. It gave him unrestricted access to all our joint accounts and the ability to liquidate assets. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen he offered me. The weight of it in my hand triggered a memory so vivid it almost made me nauseous. 5 years ago, I stood in a grimy pawn shop on the outskirts of Atlanta. I was clutching my mother's vintage pearl necklace, the one she had worn to her debutante ball. It was the only thing of value I had access to without alerting my father. Julian needed $20,000 for payroll, or his startup would fold. He had wept in my arms the night before his pride broken. I sold those pearls to save him. I sacrificed my family legacy to build his. And now he was using the empire I saved to finance his new life with my sister-in-law. The rage that flared in my chest was cold and sharp, but my hand remained steady. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. But I added a subtle loop to the Z and failed to cross the A in my usual manner. To the naked eye, it looked authentic. To the bank's high-security signature verification software, which I had insisted we install years ago, it would be flagged as a mismatch. The transfer he planned to make would be blocked pending biometric verification. "There you go," I said, handing the papers back. "You are the best wife a man could ask for," Julian said, tucking the documents into his briefcase. "Now go pack. The car will be here in an hour." The ride to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was silent. I watched the city pass by, knowing this was the last time I would see it as Julian's wife. When the driver dropped me off at the international terminal, I tipped him generously and walked through the sliding glass doors. But I did not head to the TSA checkpoint. Instead, I walked briskly to the lower-level arrivals area. A nondescript gray sedan was waiting at the curb just as I had arranged. I slid into the back seat and the driver nodded once before pulling into traffic. We drove north away from the airport and toward the heart of Buckhead. The car pulled up to the private entrance of a luxury high-rise residence. I had purchased the penthouse unit 3 months ago under a shell company named Nemesis Holdings when I first started noticing discrepancies in our bank statements. I took the private elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, I was not greeted by an empty apartment. My private investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus, was standing by the window. 2 cybersecurity experts were already set up at the dining table, their monitors glowing with streams of data. "We are live," Mrs. Vance Marcus said, turning to face me. "We have access to the internal servers." I walked to the window, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. Julian thought I was 30,000 feet in the air on my way to... I turned back to the team, my eyes locking on the monitors. "Let us get to work," I said. "Bring up the master bedroom feeds," I said to the cybersecurity lead, a young woman named Chloe who typed furiously on her keyboard. I had installed the internal security system 6 months ago, under the guise of monitoring our elderly French bulldog who had been prone to seizures. Julian had mocked me for being an overprotective pet parent, calling it a waste of bandwidth. He never bothered to learn how to access the app or realize that the cameras also recorded audio in high definition. That arrogance was his Achilles heel. He assumed that because he did not care about the details, they did not exist. The large center monitor flickered to life, revealing the sanctuary of my master suite. The room was bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun, filtering through the silk drapes I had specially ordered from Italy. But the serenity of the space was shattered by the scene unfolding on the screen. Julian was there. He had already discarded his suit jacket and was loosening his tie, and there was Tiffany. My sister-in-law was spinning around in the center of the room holding a bottle of Cristal. My Cristal. The bottle I had been saving for our 10th anniversary. She looked like a child who had just broken into a candy store drunk on entitlement and stolen champagne. She fell back onto my bed, her shoes still on the Egyptian cotton duvet that I insisted be dry-cleaned weekly. I watched her bounce on the mattress, laughing maniacally. "It feels different in here already," she said, her voice crystal clear through the speakers. "It feels lighter, without her heavy, judgmental energy suffocating us." Julian laughed and crawled onto the bed beside her, clinking his glass against the bottle she held. "To freedom," he said. "And to $10 million. May she enjoy Paris while she can, because when she comes back, she will be flying coach." I watched my husband run his hand down the arm of his brother's wife. The nausea I felt was physical, a heavy stone in the pit of my stomach, but I forced myself to keep looking. I needed to burn this image into my mind. I needed to let the hatred cauterize the wound of my love for him. The bedroom door swung open and Mama Joyce marched in. For a split second I held my breath, expecting her to be appalled. This was her son in bed with his brother's wife in the middle of the day. In any decent family, this would be a scandal of biblical proportions. But Mama Joyce did not look angry. She looked triumphant. She walked over to the bed and patted Tiffany's leg with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Finally, she sighed, sinking into my favorite velvet reading chair, as if she were taking her rightful place on a throne. "The air in here is finally breathable." I never liked how she decorated this room. Too modern, too cold, just like her. "Don't worry," Mama Tiffany said, sitting up and pouring a glass for the older woman. "We will redo everything. Once the funds clear next week and the transfer to the Cayman accounts is complete, I am hiring that designer from Buckhead you like. We will make this house a home again." Mama Joyce beamed, taking the glass. I always knew you were the right one for him, Tiffany. You have class, you understand family. Zara never fit in. She thought her money made her better than us. She walked around here with her nose in the air, acting like she was royalty just because her daddy owned trucks. The irony was suffocating. My money was the only reason they were not living in a foreclosure. My daddy's trucks had paid for the roof over their heads, the clothes on their backs, and the wine in their glasses. But to them, I was just the bank teller they had finally figured out how to rob. Then the conversation shifted, and the temperature in the penthouse seemed— Mama Joyce looked at Tiffany's stomach with a predatory gleam. And the baby, she asked, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. You are taking care of my grandbaby. Tiffany smiled, a slow, satisfied curve of her lips that looked demonic on the high-definition screen. She placed her hand over her abdomen, rubbing it in slow circles. He is strong, she said. Just like his father. She looked at Julian with pure adoration. Poor Trey, she mocked, her voice dripping with a toxic mix of pity and contempt. He thinks he is going to be a daddy. He is painting the nursery in their condo right now. He doesn't realize he is just the uncle. This baby is a Vance heir, a real Vance. He will inherit everything Julian builds, not Trey's mediocrity. Julian leaned in and kissed her forehead, his hand covering hers on her stomach. He will have my name eventually, he promised. Once the divorce is final and we move the assets, we can tell the truth. Trey will understand. He always does what he is told. Besides, he should be grateful. He gets to play house for a few months while we secure the bag. I stared at the screen, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. They weren't just stealing my money, they were deceiving Trey in the cruelest way possible. But they had made a miscalculation. Trey might have been soft, but he was the only one in that family with a conscience. And I had the medical records that would destroy their entire fantasy. Trey was the collateral damage in this war. He was the only member of the Vance family who had ever treated me with genuine kindness. While Mama Joyce looked at him with disappointment because he lacked Julian's shark-like ambition, I saw a man who simply wanted to be happy. He worshipped Tiffany. He looked at her with a reverence that was heartbreaking to witness, especially now that I knew she was carrying his brother's child. But I needed to be certain. I could not base my entire strategy on a hunch derived from an overheard conversation. I needed scientific proof. I drove to the private medical practice of Dr. Evans in Buckhead. He had been the Vance family physician for decades, but more importantly, he was a man who owed his career to my father. When a malpractice lawsuit threatened to destroy him 10 years ago, my father had quietly covered his legal fees and settlements. I knew he would see me. I walked past the receptionist and straight to his office door. When I entered, he looked up startled, but the recognition in his eyes was immediate. He knew a debt was being called in. I sat down and got straight to the point. I need to see Trey's medical records, I said, specifically anything related to fertility or genetic testing. Dr. Evans hesitated, his face paling. Zara, you know I cannot do that. It is a violation of federal law. And hiding assets during a divorce is a violation of state law, doctor. My husband is trying to destroy me. If I go down, I will drag every secret this family has into the light, including who really paid for your daughter's tuition at Stanford. He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed, defeated. He typed a few commands into his computer and turned the monitor toward me. I scanned the digital file. My eyes landed on a procedure dated 2 years ago. Bilateral vasectomy. The notes were clear. Trey had elected for the surgery after genetic screening confirmed he carried the markers for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that had killed his grandfather at 40. He had terrified of passing the gene to a child, so he had ended his lineage to protect an unborn life. He had done it secretly to spare Tiffany the burden of the decision. My heart broke for him. He was protecting a wife who was currently sleeping with his brother. This confirmed everything. Trey was sterile. The baby Tiffany was carrying could not possibly be his. It was Julian's child conceived in betrayal and being passed off as a miracle to a man they considered a fool. Suddenly my phone buzzed violently in my purse. I pulled it out and saw a notification from my private banking app. Priority alert. Wire transfer declined. Amount $2 million. Reason signature verification failed. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. It had begun. Julian had tried to move the first tranche of money to the Shell account in the Caymans. He had walked right into the trap I set with that Mont Blanc pen in our kitchen. The phone immediately started ringing. The caller ID flashed hubby with a picture of us from our honeymoon. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice into the higher register of the naive, trusting wife he thought I was. I swiped to answer, prepared to hear the panic in his voice. I adjusted the silk scarf around my neck to hide the lack of a coat and sat perfectly still in front of the green screen Marcus had rigged in the penthouse's spare room. The monitor displayed a pre-recorded loop of the Parisian skyline, complete with the distant twinkle of the Eiffel Tower at twilight. It was a convincing illusion of a luxury suite at the Ritz. I took a steadying breath and tapped the green icon to accept the video call. Julian's face filled the screen instantly. He was not the charming husband who had kissed me goodbye hours ago. His face was flushed a deep crimson, and a vein throbbed visibly in his temple. He was pacing in his home office, the background blurring as he moved. "Zara, what the hell is going on with your signature?" he barked, his voice distorted by the poor connection he was likely causing by pacing. "The bank just flagged the power of attorney. They rejected the transfer." $2 million, Zara. Rejected. Do you know how this looks? I have vendors breathing down my neck and the compliance officer is asking questions I do not want to answer. I feigned a look of absolute bewilderment, widening my eyes just enough to sell the performance. "What do you mean, rejected?" I asked, keeping my voice pitched high with travel fatigue. "I signed it right there on the island, Julian. You saw me. It must be a system error. You know how glitchy their fraud detection can be when I travel." "I am so sorry, baby. I just got into the room and I am exhausted. The flight was turbulent and my head is pounding." Julian stopped pacing and glared at the camera lens. "It is not a glitch, Zara. They said the curvature of the letters does not match your biometric profile on file. They need a digital verification immediately, or they are freezing the authorization for 48 hours. I cannot wait 2 days. I need to move this capital tonight. Fix it." I bit my lip, pretending to hold back tears of frustration while my fingers danced over my keyboard. I was not opening this bank's portal. I was pulling up the file Chloe had coded for me earlier that morning. It was a masterpiece of deception, a PDF file labeled Updated POA Secure.pdf that contained a sophisticated keylogger and remote access Trojan in its metadata. Okay, do not yell at me," I said, making my voice tremble. "I have my laptop right here. I can generate a new digital signature through the secure DocuSign portal. It is encrypted, so it should bypass the manual review. Just give me a second to log in." I hit the send button and watched the progress bar fill. "I sent it to your private email," I said. "Check it now." Julian turned back to his desktop monitor, his eyes scanning furiously. I watched him refresh his inbox, his impatience radiating through the screen. "Got it," he snapped. He clicked the mouse. In the corner of the room, Chloe gave me a thumbs up. On her monitor, a stream of code cascaded down like green rain. We were in. The file opened on his screen, looking exactly like a standard legal document. "Thank God," he muttered, scrolling to the bottom to see the digital signature. "This looks valid. I am forwarding it to the banker now. Next time be more careful, Zara. You almost cost me a fortune. Go to sleep. Enjoy your shopping." He cut the feed without a goodbye. The screen went black, reflecting my own cold smile. I spun my chair around to face Chloe and Marcus. The main monitor in the penthouse flickered as it mirrored Julian's desktop in real time. We watched as he logged into his offshore banking interface. He didn't even hesitate. He typed in his username and a complex password that Chloe's software captured instantly. There it was. the entire blueprint of his betrayal laid out in high definition. A spreadsheet titled Operation Exit Strategy was open on his desktop. It detailed every transfer, every shell company, and every hidden asset. I saw the names of banks in the Cayman Islands, accounts in Switzerland, and a crypto wallet containing funds I didn't even know existed. He wasn't just skimming off the top. He was liquidating the entire company. The $10 million from the patent sale, the operating capital, even the reserve funds for employee pensions were all slated for transfer. I scanned the document, my eyes landing on a line item labeled Tiffany Allowance. He was siphoning $5,000 a week to an account in her maiden name. My stomach churned, but the nausea was quickly replaced by a surge of icy determination. I had the proof, I had the passwords, and most importantly, I had access. Julian thought he had just cleared the hurdle to his new life. He had no idea he had just handed me the detonator to blow it all up. With full access to Julian's desktop secured, I turned my attention to the real threat, Tiffany. Julian was arrogant, but Tiffany was calculating. She was the one structuring the transfers to the Cayman Islands, and she was the one managing the shell companies. I needed to know her endgame. I instructed Chloe to bypass the firewalls on Tiffany's personal email accounts, which were foolishly linked to her workstation. It took less than 3 minutes. The screen filled with her inbox, and what I found made me laugh out loud in that quiet penthouse. My husband thought he was running off with a brilliant financial strategist, a woman of high breeding and Yale education, who was his intellectual equal. What he was actually running off with was a con artist. The emails told a pathetic story. There were dozens of money transfers, not to offshore investment accounts, but to a joint account in rural Alabama, held by her parents. Subject lines read, "Rent money and Dad's truck payments." I opened one attachment and saw a transfer of $15,000 from Julian's personal savings account to pay off a gambling debt for her father. She wasn't just helping Julian steal from me, she was stealing from him. She was skimming off the top of his skimming operation. Julian thought he was the wolf, but he was just another sheep being sheared. She was funneling his liquidity out the back door to prop up her family while playing the role of the sophisticated heiress to his face. I downloaded every receipt, every email, and every bank transfer. This was the ammunition I would need to turn Trey against her when the time was right. Just as I finished saving the files, my phone buzzed. It was Mama Joyce. I let it ring twice, composing my features before answering. I had to remember I was supposed to be in a luxury suite in Paris, not sitting in a command center in Atlanta plotting their destruction. "Hello, Mama Joyce," I answered, my voice bright and airy. "Zara, darling," she purred, her tone dripping with a sweetness that usually preceded a request for money. "I hope you are enjoying Paris. The weather must be divine." I rolled my eyes. It is beautiful, Mama. I am just about to head out for some shopping. What can I do for you?" "Well, you know the annual gala for the foundation is coming up," she began. "We are trying to raise funds for the Inner City Youth Initiative. It is such a worthy cause, and I know how much you love to give back. We are a little short on the target goal. I was wondering if you could authorize a donation. Say $50,000. I almost choked. The Inner City Youth Initiative was her code word for her personal slush fund. I had seen her browser history. She had been eyeing a vintage Himalayan Birkin bag on an auction site for weeks. The starting bid was exactly $50,000. She wanted me to buy her a handbag while she helped her son steal my company. "Of course, Mama," I said, feigning enthusiasm. "You know I always support the community. 50,000 is no problem. But there is a tiny issue. Because I am out of the country, the bank has flagged my remote authorization privileges for large charitable donations. It is a new security protocol." I could hear the irritation in her breath. "Well, can't you just override it? You are the owner, aren't you?" "Not from here," I lied smoothly. "But there is a workaround. If you go to the main branch downtown and present the request in person as a board member of the foundation, they can override the digital lock. You just need to sign for it physically." She sighed heavily. "Oh, that is such a hassle, Zara. I have a hair appointment at 3, but I suppose for the children I can make the sacrifice. I will go down there now. Thank you, darling. Enjoy your croissants. She hung up. I immediately dialed the number for Mr. Henderson, the branch manager at our primary bank. He was a man of integrity who had worked with my father for 30 years. He despised Julian and tolerated Mama Joyce only out of respect for me. Mr. Henderson, I said when he answered. Joyce Vance is coming in to request a withdrawal from the foundation account. I want you to trigger the secondary oversight clause. The clause I referred to was a little-known stipulation in the account's bylaws. It required 2 signatures for any withdrawal over $10,000, mine and hers. Since I was ostensibly in Paris, she would be unable to get the money. But I had also quietly revoked her signatory privileges an hour ago, citing a security audit. I pulled up the bank's security camera feed on the side monitor. 20 minutes later, Mama Joyce strutted into the lobby. She was wearing a white fur coat in 70-degree weather, looking every inch the matriarch she believed she was. She bypassed the line and marched straight to the teller's window, slapping her ID on the counter. I watched as the teller typed something, then frowned. He called Mr. Henderson over. I couldn't hear the audio, but the body language was unmistakable. Mr. Henderson spoke calmly. Mama Joyce stiffened. She pointed a manicured finger in his face. She slammed her hand on the counter. Her mouth was moving rapidly, likely screaming, "Do you know who I am?" The other customers stopped their transactions to watch. She was causing a scene, a massive public meltdown in the middle of the most prestigious bank in Atlanta. Security guards stepped forward. Mama Joyce threw her hands up, knocking a display of brochures to the floor before storming out, her face twisted in a mask of fury. She didn't get her Birkin, and she had just embarrassed herself in front of half the city's business community. 1 down, 3 to go. The red warning banners on Julian's computer screen were multiplying. Transaction failed, compliance review pending, account frozen. He looked like a man trying to hold back a tsunami with a paper umbrella. From my vantage point in the penthouse, I watched him pace the length of his office, his expensive Italian loafers wearing a path in the carpet. He grabbed the phone and dialed Tiffany, who was supposedly in her own office down the hall. "Get in here now!" he roared. Seconds later, Tiffany burst into the room, closing the blinds behind her. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by a frantic energy that matched his. "What did you do?" she hissed. "The Cayman banker just called me. He said the funds are flagged for suspicious activity. They are asking for source of wealth documentation, Julian. We do not have legitimate source of wealth documentation." "It is her bank," Julian spat, running his hands through his hair. "They are blocking the power of attorney." "I told you we should have moved the money in smaller increments. You got greedy, Tiffany. You wanted it all at once." "No, you got arrogant," she shot back, her voice rising. "You said she was too stupid to notice. You said she signs whatever you put in front of her. Now the system is locking us out." They stopped speaking English, abruptly switching to Spanish, the language they used for their darkest secrets, thinking it was their private fortress. "Pero si descubren los libros reales, estamos muertos," Julian whispered furiously. "If they find the real books, we are dead. We have been falsifying the revenue reports for 3 years, Tiffany. 3 years. We told Zara the company was profitable to get her to inject that last $5 million. If she finds out the company has been insolvent since 2021, she will not just divorce me, she will bury me." "Es tu culpa?" Tiffany replied, her eyes narrowing. "It is your fault. You spent the operating capital on your mother's gambling debts and that ridiculous yacht. I had to cook the books just to keep the lights on. We committed fraud, Julian. Federal fraud. If this money does not move today, we go to prison." I sat back in my chair, a cold smile touching my lips. There it was. The confession. I had suspected they were mismanaging funds, but I did not realize the extent of the deception. They had been lying to me since the day we married, presenting me with fabricated spreadsheets and fake growth charts while they bled the company dry. I had poured my inheritance into a black hole, believing I was investing in our future. I typed a command to Chloe. "Is the audio clear?" "Crystal clear," she replied. I saved the recording, labeling it simply, "The Confession." Then I opened the folder containing the real financial records we had extracted from his computer the night before. The discrepancy was staggering. They had reported a net profit of $2 million last year to the shareholders, while the actual bank records showed a loss of $4 million. It was time to introduce a new player to the game. I opened a secure browser and navigated to the whistleblower portal of the Internal Revenue Service. I attached the recording of their conversation, the falsified tax returns they had filed, and the actual general ledger showing the embezzlement. I added a brief note. The CEO and CFO of Julian Tech are currently attempting to wire $10 million of embezzled funds to the Cayman Islands. Please see attached evidence of tax evasion and fraud. I hit submit. 2 hours later, the chaos in Julian's office reached a crescendo. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Vance, the receptionist, said, her voice trembling. There is a courier here. He says it is urgent. Send him in. Julian barked, not looking away from his screen, where he was frantically trying to void the frozen transactions. The door opened, and a man in a cheap suit walked in. He did not look like a normal courier. He looked like government. He handed Julian a thick envelope with the Department of the Treasury seal in the corner. Julian ripped it open. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled. What is it? Tiffany asked, moving to his side. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with terror. It is a subpoena, he whispered. The IRS. They are auditing us, Tiffany. They want everything. Bank records, emails, personal assets. They are freezing the corporate accounts immediately. He dropped into his chair, the paper fluttering to the desk. How did they know? He gasped. How did they know today? I leaned toward my monitor, sipping my water. Because I told them, darling, I whispered to the screen. And the government moves very fast when they think you are stealing their money. I tracked Trey down at a quiet park near the river, where he often went to clear his head away from the suffocating atmosphere of the Vance family estate. He was sitting on a bench staring at a set of nursery paint swatches, his face soft with a hope that twisted a knife in my gut. He looked up as I approached, his expression shifting instantly from daydreaming to defensiveness. He started to stand up, looking around nervously, as if expecting Mama Joyce to jump out of the bushes and scold him for fraternizing with the enemy. Zara, he said, his voice tight. I really shouldn't be seen with you. Julian said you were in Paris. If he finds out I'm talking to you, he will cut me off. I sat down on the other end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. He is not going to cut you off, Trey, I said softly. But he is going to cut you out. There is a difference. He frowned, clutching the paint chips tighter. I don't know what kind of game you are playing, but I don't want any part of it. Tiffany and I are happy. We are having a baby. You are just jealous because Julian is finally happy too. I reached into my purse and pulled out a plain manila envelope. I didn't say a word, I just slid it across the space between us. He looked at it warily, then back at me. What is this? Just look, I said. He opened the flap and pulled out a stack of papers. They were credit card statements and hotel invoices. I watched his eyes scan the lines. The Ritz-Carlton in Chicago, the Four Seasons in Miami, a boutique hotel in Manhattan. All dates when Julian was supposedly at tech conferences and Tiffany was visiting her sick aunt in Alabama. 1 room, king bed, room service for 2. Trey's hands started to shake. He dropped the papers onto the bench as if they burned him. This doesn't prove anything, he stammered, his voice rising in panic. They work together, Zara. They are executives. Sometimes they have to travel. Maybe the hotels were fully booked. Maybe they just shared a suite to save money. You are reaching. You are just a bitter woman trying to destroy my family because you couldn't keep your husband. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to do next. It was cruel, but it was the only way to wake him up. Is that what you really think? Trey, I asked. My voice dropped dead serious. You think I am doing this out of spite? I am doing this because you are the only decent person in this entire family, and they are playing you for a fool. He stood up, his face flushing red. I am not listening to this. Tiffany loves me. She is carrying my child. A miracle baby. The doctor said it happens sometimes even after a vasectomy. We beat the odds. I stood up too, blocking his path. I pulled the second document from my bag. It was the medical report from Dr. Evans, the one I had coerced him into giving me. I held it up so he couldn't look away. Miracles are for fairy tales, Trey. I said, my voice hard. Science is for reality. Look at the date on this report. It is a post-operative fertility analysis from 6 months ago. You took it just to be safe, didn't you? And look at the result. Azoospermia. 0 sperm count. You are sterile, Trey. Completely and irreversibly sterile. He froze, his eyes locked on the paper. I watched the denial fight with the logic in his brain. Tiffany is 3 months pregnant. I continued relentlessly. Do the math. If you have 0 sperm and she is pregnant, who is the father? Who is the only other man she spends all her time with? Who is the man paying for her car, her clothes, and that nursery you are painting? Trey made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He grabbed the paper from my hand, reading it over and over as if hoping the words would change. He collapsed back onto the bench, his head in his hands. No, he moaned. Not Julian. He wouldn't. He is my brother. He would, and he did, I said, sitting beside him and putting a hand on his shaking shoulder. I heard them, Trey. I have it on recording. They laughed about it. They called you an idiot. They said you were just a babysitter until they could run off to Spain with my money. Trey looked up, his face wet with tears, his expression shattering into 1,000 pieces. He looked at the river, then back at the hotel receipts scattered on the bench. The adoration in his eyes died, replaced by a hollow, haunting darkness. She lied, he whispered. She looked me in the eye and told me it was ours. I know, I said, feeling my own throat tighten. And I am going to make them pay for it. But I cannot do it alone. I need the company seal, Trey. It is in the floor safe in Julian's home office. I know he gave you the combination in case of emergencies. Well, this is an emergency. He wiped his face with his sleeve, his jaw setting into a hard line. He looked at the paint swatches one last time, then crumpled them in his fist. I will get it, he said, his voice void of emotion. I will get you the seal. Burn them down, Zara. Burn them all down. I sat in the penthouse command center with the heavy brass company seal resting in my lap. Trey had delivered it at dawn, his eyes red from sleeplessness, but his resolve hard as granite. Next to the seal lay the document that would end Julian's reign. My father was a man who believed in trust, but he believed in insurance more. 5 years ago, when I begged him to fund Julian's startup, he agreed on one condition. A clause buried deep in the bylaws. The golden share. It was a nuclear option designed for exactly this moment, a failsafe that gave the holder absolute veto power over the board and the CEO in cases of financial misconduct. Julian, in his arrogance, had signed it without reading the fine print, believing he could always charm his way out of trouble. He was about to learn that charm does not override contract law. I watched the conference room feed on my main monitor. Julian sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking every bit the master of the universe. He was flanked by his sycophants and Tiffany, who sat at his right hand, looking pale but defiant. They were expecting a routine rubber stamp meeting to approve the new strategic direction of the company, which was code for liquidating assets before the IRS closed in. They thought I was shopping in Paris. They thought they were untouchable. The double doors swung open. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowing. Attorney Samuel Cohen walked in. He was not a large man, but he carried the weight of 30 years of corporate litigation in his briefcase. He did not wait for an invitation. He walked straight to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down, placing a single thin file in front of him. Julian laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed in the room. Cohen, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. I did not know my wife's personal attorney was on the board. Last I checked, Zara was enjoying the boutiques in Paris, and I hold the proxy for her shares. You have no business here. Get out before I call security. Cohen did not blink. He did not even look at the security guards who had taken a step forward. I am here representing the majority interest of this company, Mr. Vance. And I am here to inform you that you are being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending an investigation into financial misconduct and embezzlement. Julian slammed his hand on the table so hard his water glass jumped. You cannot put me on leave, he shouted, standing up, his face twisting into a mask of rage. I own 51% of this company. I am the founder. I am the CEO. I have the controlling interest. Zara only holds 49%. Even if she were here, she could not outvote me. I built this. I own this. You are wasting my time. Security, get him out of my building. Two guards stepped forward, reaching for Cohen's arms. Cohen held up a hand. It was a small gesture, but it froze the room. He reached into his file and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished wood. You are correct about the percentages, Mr. Vance. Cohen said, his voice calm and deadly level. You do hold 51% of the Class B common stock. But you seem to have forgotten the Class A preferred stock, the single golden share issued at the company's incorporation to the primary investor. It is held by Zara Vance, and according to the bylaws section 4, paragraph 2, that share carries absolute veto power over any executive decision, including the retention of the CEO, in the event of malfeasance. The room went silent. Tiffany started typing frantically on her laptop, likely trying to pull up the corporate charter she had never bothered to read. Julian looked like he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. That is a lie, he whispered. That is not possible. I never agreed to that. It is a standard protection clause for angel investors. Cohen continued. Your wife did not just give you money, Julian. She bought your leash, and she has decided to yank it. You are out. Your access to the building is revoked, effective immediately. Julian crumpled the paper in his fist. You can't do this, he snarled. I will fight this. I will drag this out in court for years. You can't fire me in a private meeting with no witnesses. Cohen stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. You are right. This feels anticlimactic. We should do this properly. This meeting is adjourned. But do not worry, Mr. Vance. The real shareholder meeting will take place tomorrow night, at your gala. My client prefers a larger audience for your termination. He turned and walked out, leaving Julian standing in the wreckage of his arrogance. I watched on the monitor as Julian sank into his chair, his face a portrait of pure terror. I took a sip of my tea. The trap was sprung. The Entrepreneur of the Year Gala was not merely a party, it was the coronation ceremony of Atlanta's black elite. It was the night where alliances were forged in the fires of ambition and reputations were either solidified or destroyed over glasses of overpriced champagne. For Julian, this night was supposed to be his victory lap. He had spent weeks curating every detail, intending to use the platform not just to celebrate his award, but to soft-launch Tiffany as the new face of the company. The narrative he had crafted was sickeningly clever. He planned to present Tiffany as the brilliant interim CFO who had stepped up while his wife was absent, painting her as the savior of the business and the mother of the future heir. He wanted to make their transition from illicit lovers to power couple look like a necessary evolution for the good of the empire. He thought he was the director of this play, but he did not realize he was just an actor standing on a trapdoor. I knew that to destroy him publicly, I needed absolute control over the environment. I could not risk a sympathetic sound engineer cutting the mic or a loyal event planner pulling the plug on the video feed. I needed to own the stage literally. I made a call to Mrs. Higgins, the owner of Elite Occasions, the premier event planning firm managing the gala. Mrs. Higgins was a wonderful woman who made the best crab cakes in Georgia. But I knew from my due diligence that her company was leveraging heavy debt to stay afloat. I requested an immediate meeting at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town. I did not negotiate. I placed a cashier's check on the table for double the valuation of her company. The only condition was that the sale remained confidential for 48 hours, and that I was given immediate administrative access to the run of show for the gala. She signed the papers with a shaking hand, and just like that, I owned the night. I spent the next 3 hours rewriting the script of my husband's destruction. I accessed the audiovisual server and located the file labeled Julian Tribute Final.mp4. It was a montage of his speeches and staged photos set to inspirational music. I deleted it. In its place, I uploaded a new file. I adjusted the lighting cues, ensuring that when the moment came, the house lights would cut, leaving only a single harsh spotlight on the podium. I instructed the catering staff to delay the champagne toast until my signal. Every detail was calculated to maximize the impact of the truth I was about to drop. With the stage set, I needed to prepare the lead actress. I drove to a high-end salon in Buckhead, one where I was not a regular. I sat in the leather chair and looked at my reflection. Long, soft waves framed a face that had spent too many years smiling to keep the peace. That woman, the one who sold her mother's pearls, the one who begged for affection, the one who dimmed her light so her husband could shine, she had to die. She could not walk into that gala tonight. I looked at the stylist, a man with scissors poised and ready. "Cut it," I said, "all of it." He hesitated, but I nodded firmly. I watched as the long locks fell to the floor, pooling like dark silk around the chair. With every snip, I felt a weight lifting. The soft edges were sheared away, revealing the sharp angles of my jaw and the hardness in my eyes that I had been hiding. When he was finished, I didn't look like the sweet, supportive wife anymore. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a predator. I went back to the penthouse and put on the dress. It was a structured architectural piece in blood red, the one color Mama Joyce had always forbidden me to wear because she said it was too aggressive for a lady. I pulled the zipper up like I was putting on armor. I applied a dark crimson lipstick that matched the dress perfectly. I slid my feet into stilettos that were sharp enough to be weapons. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, and for the first time in years I recognized the woman staring back. She was not broken, she was forged. I checked my watch. The guests were arriving. Julian was probably adjusting his tie, thinking he had won. I picked up my clutch, which held the phone containing the command codes for the gala's audiovisual system. "It is time to go to the theater," I whispered to the empty room. "It is time to watch the show." The ballroom of the St. Regis was transformed into a gilded cage of ambition. 500 of Atlanta's most influential figures were packed into a space that smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. From the shadows of the service entrance where I waited, I watched my husband and his mistress play house. Julian stood near the center of the room, a glass of champagne raised high, his other hand resting possessively on the small of Tiffany's back. She was wearing a pale pink gown, modest and demure, the picture of innocent grace. It was a calculated costume designed to make her look like the sweet, supportive partner he deserved, rather than the woman helping him embezzle millions. Mama Joyce was fluttering between groups of guests, like a hummingbird high on sugar. I could hear her voice carrying over the soft jazz music. "Have you met Tiffany?" she asked a prominent judge, practically shoving my sister-in-law forward. "She is the new interim CFO, Yale-educated. Such a brilliant mind for numbers. Unlike some people we know who just know how to spend." She laughed, a brittle sound that grated on my nerves. She was erasing me from the narrative in real time, rewriting history to fit the future she felt she was owed. She looked at Tiffany with the adoration she had never shown me, clearly believing that this white woman with the Ivy League degree was the trophy her son needed to legitimize his empire. I checked my phone. It was time. I signaled the lighting director in the booth above. The house lights dimmed abruptly, plunging the room into a hushed twilight. The murmurs of the crowd died down as confusion rippled through the room. Julian looked up, annoyed that his moment was being interrupted. He adjusted his microphone, ready to make a joke about technical difficulties. Then the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a heavy thud. A single blinding spotlight cut through the darkness, hitting me square in the chest. I stepped forward. The red dress was everything Mama Joyce hated. It was bold. It was aggressive. It was the color of blood and fire. It hugged every curve of my body, a stark contrast to the pastel submissiveness Tiffany was wearing. I heard the collective gasp of the room. They were expecting a waiter, or perhaps a surprise performer. They got the wife who was supposed to be 5,000 miles away. I began to walk. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, predatory grace of a panther stalking its prey. The crowd parted from me, their eyes wide. I could hear the whispers, starting a low buzz of gossip that followed in my wake. Is that Zara? I thought she was in Europe. Look at that dress. I kept my eyes locked on the stage, on the three people who had tried to destroy me. As I drew closer, I saw the blood drain from Julian's face. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. His hand dropped from Tiffany's back, as if he had been burned. Tiffany took a step back, her eyes darting around looking for an exit, but there was nowhere to run. Mama Joyce dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silence, but nobody looked down. They were all looking at me. I stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to the stage. Julian stumbled forward, his composure shattering. Zara. He stammered, his voice picking up on the hot mic so everyone could hear the tremor of fear. You are supposed to be in Paris. When did you get back? I smiled. It wasn't the warm smile of a loving wife. It was the sharp, jagged smile of a woman holding a match. Just in time to celebrate you, husband, I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. I wouldn't miss the most important night of your life, or the end of it. He reached out as if to stop me, to guide me away, to whisper more lies in my ear, but I sidestepped him effortlessly. I walked up the stairs, my heels clicking ominously on the wood. I walked straight to the podium. The room was dead silent now. The tension was so thick, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the building. Julian stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Tiffany was gripping her purse so hard her knuckles were white. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. It felt heavy and cool in my hand, the weapon I needed. I looked out at the sea of faces, the bankers, the investors, the friends who had smiled at me while my husband betrayed me. I looked at Mama Joyce, who was clutching her pearls in horror at my red dress. And then I looked at Julian, who was staring at me with a dawning realization that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I brought the microphone to my lips. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice echoing through the stunned ballroom. Thank you all for being here to celebrate my husband. It is truly a momentous occasion. Julian has worked so hard to build this company. He has sacrificed so much. His integrity, his marriage, his brother. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. The confusion in the room was palpable. Julian took a step toward me, his hand outstretched as if he could physically push the words back into my mouth. Zara, stop this, he hissed under his breath, his eyes darting to the cameras that were broadcasting this live to the screens flanking the stage. We can talk about this later. I turned to him and smiled, that same sharp, dangerous smile. But Julian, we are talking now, and since we are sharing everything with your friends and investors, I thought we should share the secret to your success. You always told me that business is about communication, about speaking the right language to the right people. I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space. He smelled of fear and expensive cologne. You thought you found a language I could not understand, didn't you? You thought you could hide your secrets in plain sight because you assumed I was too uneducated, too pampered, or too stupid to understand anything other than English. I switched languages effortlessly, my accent flawless, honed by years of summer immersions in Madrid that my father had insisted upon. Pero te olvidaste de una cosa importante, mi amor, I said in Spanish, my voice projecting to the back of the room. But you forgot one important thing, my love. Mi padre hizo negocios en todo el mundo. Él se aseguró de que yo pudiera entender a las serpientes sin importar el idioma que hablaran. My father did business all over the world. He made sure I could understand snakes no matter what language they spoke. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Many of the wealthy patrons in the room were bilingual international business people who understood exactly what I was saying. I saw heads turn toward each other. I saw eyebrows raise. Julian looked like he had been punched in the gut. He understood enough to know he was in trouble, but he was too paralyzed to move. ¿Recuerdas esa noche en la biblioteca? I continued relentlessly, keeping my eyes locked on his. Do you remember that night in the library? Estabas bebiendo mi vino. Estabas tocando a tu cuñada. Y le dijiste algo muy específico sobre mí. You were drinking my wine. You were touching your sister-in-law. And you said something very specific about me. I leaned into the microphone, my voice dropping an octave for maximum impact. Dijiste la estúpida no sabe nada. You said the stupid girl knows nothing. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp swept through the room. Those who understood translated for those who did not, and the shockwave spread like wildfire. Julian flinched as if I had struck him, but the loudest sound came from the floor below the stage. Crash! Tiffany had dropped her glass. The crystal shattered on the hard floor, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. Red wine splattered across the hem of her pale pink dress, looking like a fresh wound. She was staring at me, her mouth open in horror, her hands trembling violently. She knew. She knew exactly what conversation I was quoting. She knew that their fortress of secrets had just been breached. Bueno, I said, returning to English, my voice cold as ice. Here is the stupid girl Julian, and she is holding the microphone, and she is holding your future in the palm of her hand. Mama Joyce was making a choking sound, clutching her chest, as if she were having a heart attack, but no one moved to help her. They were too captivated by the spectacle on stage. Julian tried to grab the microphone from me, his desperation making him clumsy. Cut the feed, he yelled at the sound booth. Cut the mic. But the sound engineer did not move. He worked for me now. I sidestepped Julian easily. You do not want to cut the feed, Julian, I said. We are just getting to the best part. You see, ladies and gentlemen, my husband and his mistress thought they were very clever. They thought they could plot the theft of $10 million and the destruction of my life while lying in my bed drinking my champagne. They thought I was halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. I gestured grandly toward the massive LED screen behind me, which had been displaying the gala logo. But I was much closer than they thought. And I brought a souvenir. I pressed the button on the remote concealed in my hand. The screen flickered and changed. The high-definition footage from my master bedroom filled the ballroom. It was crystal clear. There was Julian's shirt unbuttoned lying on my duvet. There was Tiffany laughing and spinning with the bottle of Cristal. The audio boomed through the speakers, magnified 1,000 times. The stupid girl goes to Paris tomorrow. Julian's recorded voice sneered, echoing off the walls of the ballroom. The crowd erupted. It was chaos. But I did not look away from the screen. I pointed a finger at the image of my husband and his brother's wife plotting their crime. For those of you who need a translation, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Allow me to present the real Julian Vance. The video played on mercilessly. On the massive screen, Tiffany rubbed her stomach, a look of grotesque satisfaction on her face. He is strong, she said, her recorded voice amplified to a deafening volume. Just like his father. Poor Trey. He thinks he is going to be a daddy. He is painting the nursery right now. He does not realize he is just the uncle. This baby is a Vance heir, a real Vance. He will inherit everything Julian builds, not Trey's mediocrity. The ballroom was in pandemonium, but one sound cut through it all. A howl of pure, unadulterated agony. It came from the front row where the family table was located. Trey was standing there, his face a mask of devastation so profound it was painful to look at. He was staring up at the screen at the woman he worshipped, mocking his love and his future fatherhood. He moved like a man possessed. He vaulted over the velvet rope separating the VIP section from the stage. He did not look at Julian, who was now cowering behind the podium, realizing the physical danger he was in. Trey ignored his brother completely. He marched straight to Tiffany, who was frozen in a puddle of spilled wine and broken glass. Trey grabbed her by the shoulders. His grip was hard, desperate. He shook her, his voice raw and broken. "You said it was ours," he screamed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You looked me in the eye and told me we beat the odds. You let me pick out names. You let me paint the room blue." "Was it all a lie, Tiffany? Was every single second a lie? Tiffany sobbed, her makeup running down her face in black streaks. "Trey, please," she begged, trying to pull away. "Let me explain. It is not what it looks like. We did it for us, for our future, for us." Trey roared, his grief turning into a blinding rage. "There is no us. There never was. You used me. You used me as a cover, so you could sleep with my brother. You made me think I was going to be a father when you knew I was sterile." And then he did something that shocked the entire room into silence. He did not hit Julian. He raised his hand and slapped Tiffany across the face. The sound was sharp and brutal, a physical manifestation of his shattered heart. It was not the act of a violent man, but the desperate lash of a wounded animal. "You said you loved me," he whispered, his voice cracking. Mama Joyce, who had been paralyzed by shock, finally snapped into action. She scrambled up the stairs, her high heels clicking frantically. She threw herself between Trey and Tiffany, pushing her younger son away with surprising strength. "Stop it!" she shrieked, her face contorted. "Stop it right now, Trey! Do not touch her! She is carrying the heir! She is carrying Julian's son!" Trey stumbled back, looking at his mother with horror. "You knew," he realized. "You knew all along, didn't you, Mama? You let me believe it was mine. You let me build a life on a lie because you wanted Julian's bloodline more than you wanted my happiness." Mama Joyce did not deny it. Instead, she turned her fury on the only target she felt safe attacking. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her eyes bulging. "This is all your fault, Zara," she screamed. "You did this. You recorded this filth. You aired our dirty laundry for the world to see. You destroyed this family. You are evil. You are a devil sent to ruin my sons." I stood my ground, looking down at the woman who had made my life a misery for 5 years. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I simply held the microphone a little tighter. "No, Mama Joyce," I said, my voice calm and cold, cutting through her hysteria. "I did not destroy this family. I just turned on the lights." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the wreckage of the Vance dynasty. "You destroyed this family, Mama. When you taught your sons that integrity was a weakness and greed was a virtue," I continued. "You destroyed it when you taught them that women were not partners to be cherished, but resources to be exploited. You taught Julian that he was a king who could take whatever he wanted. And you taught Trey that he was nothing unless he served his brother." I looked at Trey, who was now sitting on the edge of the stage, head in his hands, weeping openly. "And you broke your own son's heart," I said softly, "because you couldn't stand the thought of a Vance without your precious Julian's DNA. You sacrificed Trey for a legacy that was built on theft and lies." Mama Joyce lunged at me, her hands clawing at the air, but she tripped over the train of her own gown. She fell hard, hitting the stage with a heavy thud. She lay there sobbing, not in pain but in the utter humiliation of her defeat. The queen had fallen and there was no one left to help her up. Julian looked around the room, sweat beading on his forehead as the humiliation became total. His mother was on the floor, his brother was broken, and his mistress was exposed. He had one card left, which was brute force. He turned to the security team lining the walls and screamed for them to get me out. He pointed a shaking finger at me, shouting that I was trespassing and that this was his private event. I didn't flinch or even look at the guards, I just kept my eyes on Julian. The guards didn't move a muscle. Julian roared, asking if they heard him and reminding them that he paid their salaries. The head of security, a massive man named Mr. Biggs, who had worked for my father years ago before Julian hired him, stepped out of the shadows. He walked slowly up the stairs, his face impassive. Julian sighed with relief, thinking help had arrived, and told him to throw me out on the street. Mr. Biggs stopped between us, looked at Julian, then turned to face me and nodded respectfully. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance," he said, his deep voice carrying to the front rows. "Is there a problem?" Julian looked like he was hallucinating, asking what Biggs was doing since he had given him an order. Biggs apologized to Mr. Julian but stated that his contract was with the building management and they took their orders from the owner. Julian shrieked that he was the owner and that he had rented the ballroom. I corrected him, my voice smooth, saying that he rented the ballroom, but he didn't own the building. In fact, I told him he didn't own much of anything anymore. I signaled to the screen again and a new document appeared. It was a deed of sale time-stamped 3 hours ago. I explained that he had leveraged the Julian Tech office building and this venue which his holding company purchased last year against those high-interest loans he took to pay for Tiffany's condo and his mother's gambling debts. I told him that when the IRS froze his accounts this afternoon, those loans went into immediate default, and the creditors were very happy to sell the debt to a motivated buyer for pennies on the dollar. I took a step closer to him. I bought the debt, Julian, and then I foreclosed. I own this building. I own your office. I own the chair you are sitting in. You are trespassing on my property. The color had drained from his face entirely. He looked small, like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. The reality of his destitution was crashing down on him. But then a spark of frantic hope lit up his eyes. The money, the transfer, the money, he gasped, clutching the podium for support. The 10 million, 10K. It cleared. I saw the notification before the freeze. It is in the Cayman account. You cannot touch that. That is offshore. He started to laugh, a manic, desperate sound, saying he still had the money and could buy 10 buildings. He demanded to know where his money was. I pulled my phone from my clutch. I unlocked it and opened the banking app, turning the screen so he could see it, though I made sure the cameras caught it too. "You mean this money?" I asked. He squinted at the screen. It showed a transfer of $10 million, but the destination wasn't a Cayman shell company. "You were so busy trying to bypass the signature verification that you didn't notice I had engaged the golden share clause," I said. "As the majority shareholder with veto power, I have the right to redirect funds in the event of an executive emergency. And I decided that $10 million was too much money for a thief to have." I swiped to the next screen, showing a donation receipt. "So I donated it," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "Every single cent." Julian looked like he was going to vomit, asking if I gave away his money. "Not just gave away," I corrected. "I donated it to the National Fund for Women Defrauded by Financial Predators. It seemed appropriate. And the best part is I did it in your name, Julian. You are going to be their biggest benefactor this year. Think of the tax write-off. Oh wait, you won't need tax write-offs where you are going. You cannot do that," he screamed, lunging for me, saying that was his exit strategy and his life. Mr. Biggs stepped in front of him, blocking his path with a wall of muscle. Julian bounced off the security guard's chest and fell back against the podium, sliding down to the floor, weeping. "My money," he sobbed, pounding his fist on the stage. "It was never your money, Julian," I said, looking down at him with zero pity. "It was my father's legacy. And now it is going to help women survive men like you." I turned to the crowd and told them to enjoy the rest of the evening, noting that the bar was open, and unlike my husband, I actually paid my bills. The silence that followed Julian's collapse was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of his jagged breathing against the wooden stage. But that silence did not last long. because from outside the heavy double doors of the ballroom a new sound emerged that started as a low wail and quickly grew into a cacophony of sirens that seemed to surround the building from every angle. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows, cutting through the elegant ambiance of the gala like a strobe light in a horror movie. And the guests began to murmur in panic as the realization set in that this was not part of the show. The doors burst open again, but this time it was not a dramatic entrance by a scorned wife. It was a tactical entry, as a dozen agents and windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and IRS criminal investigation swarmed the room, moving with a precision that terrified the wealthy elite of Atlanta, who scattered to clear a path as the lead agent marched straight toward the stage. He did not look at the terrified guests or the ruined decor. He looked straight at the man cowering on the floor, and his voice projected without a microphone as he announced that Julian Vance was under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Julian scrambled backward, his heels scraping against the floor until his back hit the podium, and he shrieked that this was a mistake and that he was the victim claiming that I had hacked his accounts and was trying to frame him. But the agent did not even glance at me as he stated they had received a comprehensive digital packet that afternoon, containing the original ledgers, the communication regarding the Cayman transfers, and the falsified tax returns filed for the last 3 years, along with the audio confession. He hauled Julian to his feet, and the moment the cold steel of the cuffs clicked around Julian's wrists, the last shred of his dignity evaporated, and he panicked, his eyes darting around the room wildly until they landed on Tiffany, who was still trying to wipe the wine from her dress near the edge of the stage. It was her, he screamed, struggling against the agent's grip, claiming it was all her idea because she was the CFO who cooked the books and told him they had to move the money. He shouted that he didn't know anything and that she had manipulated and seduced him to get access to the accounts, demanding they arrest her instead. 2 other agents had already flanked Tiffany, and she let out a high-pitched wail that sounded more like a siren than a human cry, sobbing that it was a lie and that he had forced her. She cried that he threatened her family, and said if she didn't help him hide the money, he would fire her and blacklist her from the industry, screaming that she was afraid for her life and that she was pregnant so they couldn't arrest her. The agents were unmoved as they spun her around and cuffed her hands behind her back, regardless of her pleas, stating that she was facing federal charges and could explain her version of events to the judge. The room devolved into a frenzy of flashes as the press cameras which Julian had paid to have there to record his triumph were now recording his absolute destruction, and I watched as they dragged Julian down the stairs, kicking and screaming like a toddler, shouting obscenities at me, at his mother, and at the world. Mama Joyce stood frozen by the fallen velvet rope, her mouth agape, watching her golden child being treated like a common criminal, and she reached out a hand as he passed, but he spat at the ground near her feet, his face twisted in hate, screaming that she had let this happen because she told him he was untouchable. I stood alone on the stage, the undisputed queen of the wreckage, and a waiter who had been hiding behind a speaker stack during the commotion cautiously stepped forward, holding a tray with a single untouched glass of red wine. So I smiled at him and took the glass, walking to the very edge of the stage, looking down at the path the agents were clearing through the crowd. As they dragged my husband and his mistress through the double doors and out into the night to face the waiting police vans, I raised the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the finish as the doors swung shut behind them, sealing their fate, because the show was over and I was the only one left standing. The visiting room at the Fulton County Jail smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat, a sensory assault that made me want to turn around and run back to the safety of my penthouse, but I forced my feet to move forward because this was the final act of the play I had written, and I needed to see the curtain fall. When the guard escorted Julian into the room, I almost did not recognize him, because the man who had spent $5,000 on a single bespoke suit was now wearing an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion, and his hair, usually trimmed to perfection, was matted and greasy, while dark hollows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and the stark terror of a man who had lost his crown. He sat down across from me behind the thick plexiglass partition and picked up the receiver, his hands shaking visibly. "Zara." He breathed, his voice cracking through the static of the phone line as if he couldn't believe I was actually there. "Thank God you came," he said, his eyes wide and pleading. "You have to help me because you are the only one who can. You have to get me out of here. The lawyer says they are denying bail because of the flight risk and they think I have assets overseas, but you have to tell them I don't. You have to tell them I am not going anywhere." I picked up my receiver, but I did not say a word. I just looked at him, and I looked at the man I had shared a bed with, the man I had built a life with, and I searched for any trace of the husband I thought I knew. But there was nothing there, just a desperate stranger who had tried to rob me blind. "Baby, please," he pleaded, pressing his hand against the glass as if he could reach through it to touch me. "I know you are angry, and you have every right to be, because I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But it was Tiffany. She got inside my head, and she told me you didn't respect me, and she told me we needed the money to be free." "I never stopped loving you, Zara," he insisted, his voice dropping to a whisper, intended to sound intimate. "We can fix this, and I will testify against her. I will tell them it was all her idea, and I will leave her, Zara. I swear I will never speak to her again. Just get me out of here, and we can start over, and we can go to Paris for real this time." The audacity was breathtaking because he was offering to trade his pregnant mistress for his freedom without a second of hesitation, and he was willing to throw the mother of his unborn child to the wolves if it meant he could sleep in a comfortable bed tonight. It was the final confirmation that he loved no one but himself. I reached into my bag and pulled out a blue folder, but I did not ask the guard for permission. I just pressed the document against the glass so he could read it. It was a divorce decree, uncontested, citing irreconcilable differences and demanding total forfeiture of all marital assets in exchange for my refusal to pursue additional civil damages for emotional distress. "Sign it," I said, my voice calm and steady, cutting through his desperate ramblings. He stared at the paper, then at me, his eyes narrowing as the realization set in. "You want a divorce?" He spat, his tone shifting instantly from begging to bitter. "You think I'm going to sign away everything while I'm sitting in a cage? You are going to sign it, Julian," I said, "because if you do not, I will let the federal prosecutors add a conspiracy charge to Trey's indictment." Julian froze at the mention of his brother. "Trey?" he whispered, confusion clouding his anger. "What does Trey have to do with this?" "Trey is on the board of directors," I reminded him, "and Trey gave me the company seal." The prosecutor is arguing that Trey must have known about the embezzlement because he had access to the safe, and they are looking at him as an accessory. He could face 5 years, Julian, unless the mastermind of the operation confesses that he acted alone and manipulated his brother into silence. I watched the gears turn in his head, and I knew he did not care about Trey, but he cared about how he looked, because if he went down protecting his brother, he might salvage a shred of his reputation in the streets. But if he let his brother go to jail for his crimes, he would be a pariah even in prison. "If I sign this and take the fall for everything, you will keep Trey out of it?" he asked, his voice devoid of the charm he used to wield like a weapon. "I will hand over the recordings proving Trey was unaware of the fraud until last week, I promised. I will make sure he walks away clean, but you have to sign the divorce papers and you have to plead guilty, so there are no trials and no deals. You take the weight." He looked at me with a hatred so pure, it felt like heat radiating through the glass, and he picked up the pen the guard had provided, signing the paper with a violent slash of ink before slamming it against the partition. There he screamed, his face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "You got what you wanted, you witch. You took my company, you took my money, and now you took my brother. I hope you are happy, Zara, and I hope you rot in that big empty house, because you were always a cold, heartless bitch, and you never deserved me. You think you won, but you are going to be alone for the rest of your miserable life." I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress and looking at him one last time, at the man who was now just a number in the system. "I am not alone, Julian," I said quietly. "I have my dignity, and I have my freedom." I turned to walk away, signaling the guard that the visit was over. "Enjoy the next 15 years, husband," I said over my shoulder without looking back. "I hear the food in here is terrible." I walked out of the visitation room, and the sound of his screaming curses was cut off as the heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, sealing him in the hell he had created for himself. The pounding on the heavy oak front door was not the knock of a visitor, but the demand of an invader. I watched the security monitor from the kitchen island, sipping my tea with a calmness that would have been impossible a week ago. On the screen, Mama Joyce was pressing the doorbell repeatedly, her face distorted by a mixture of rage and panic. She looked nothing like the regal matriarch who had held court at the gala. Her hair was slightly askew, and she was wearing a tracksuit instead of her usual designer armor. I finished my tea, set the mug in the sink, and walked to the foyer. I disarmed the alarm and pulled the door open. Mama Joyce did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the hallway, her eyes darting around as if checking to make sure the furniture was still there. "You have some nerve locking me out of my own home," she spat, turning to face me. "I have been calling you for 2 days, Zara. I know what you did to Julian. I know you tricked him into signing those papers, but that does not work with me. I am not some foolish boy you can manipulate." "This is not your home, Joyce," I said, dropping the mama. "It never was. This estate was purchased by Julian Tech as a corporate retreat. When I foreclosed on the company's assets, I acquired the deed. You are trespassing on company property." She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Corporate assets, deeds, legal mumbo-jumbo. This is my son's house, which makes it my house. I am the grandmother of the next generation of Vances. You cannot just throw an old woman out on the street. It is elder abuse. And if you do not hand over the keys and leave right now, I will make sure every single person in Atlanta knows exactly what kind of heartless woman you are." She took a step closer, her finger wagging in my face. "I speak to the deacon board tonight, Zara. I will tell Pastor Jenkins that you are a thief who stole a man's legacy while he was vulnerable. I will tell the Women's Auxiliary that you are mentally unstable. By Sunday morning you will be a pariah in this town. No one will do business with you. No one will even look at you." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of pity. She truly believed her influence was invincible. She thought the church was her shield and her sword. She did not realize she had already been disarmed. "You are going to talk to Pastor Jenkins?" I asked, my voice mild. "That is interesting because I spoke to him this morning. I sent him an email, actually. It had a very interesting video attachment." Mama Joyce froze, her fingers still in the air. "What video?" "The one from the master bedroom," I explained. "The one where you sat in my chair drinking my wine and told Julian that stealing my inheritance was a stroke of genius. The one where you explicitly told him to wash the money through the church donation fund to avoid taxes before moving it offshore." Her face went gray. "You didn't." "I did," I confirmed. "And I CC'd the entire deacon board. I believe they are holding an emergency meeting right now to discuss your removal from the Treasury Committee. I do not think they took kindly to your plan to use the building fund as a temporary holding account for embezzled cash." She staggered back, reaching for the hallway table to steady herself. "You destroyed me," she whispered. "I am a pillar of this community." "You were a pillar built on sand," I corrected. "And the tide just came in." I walked past her and opened the front door wide. A large white box truck was idling in the driveway. 2 men in blue uniforms were standing by the ramp waiting for my signal. "You have 60 minutes, I said, checking my watch. "These gentlemen are here to move you out. You may take your clothing, your personal toiletries, and any family photos that do not include the frame. The furniture, the electronics, the art, and the jewelry that Julian bought with company funds stay here. They are assets subject to liquidation to pay back the creditors." You cannot be serious, she gasped, looking from the truck to me. I have nowhere to go. The condo downtown was seized. My car was leased by the company. That sounds like a problem for your son to solve, I said. But oh wait, he is currently being processed at the county detention center. Maybe you can call Tiffany. I hear she is out on bail. Mama Joyce tried to run up the stairs perhaps to grab the jewelry she had stashed in the guest safe, but the movers were faster, blocking her path with polite efficiency. Ma'am, we need you to start packing, the lead mover said, handing her a stack of cardboard boxes. For the next hour I supervised as the woman who had terrorized me for 5 years was reduced to packing her life into brown boxes. She tried to sneak a silver tea set into her bag, but I pointed it out and the movers gently removed it. She tried to take the designer curtains, but I reminded her they were fixtures. She cried, she screamed, she bargained, but I stood firm, my face impassive. When the 60 minutes were up, the movers carried her boxes out to the curb. They did not load them into the truck, because the truck was only there to facilitate the eviction, not to transport her. I had called a taxi, but she refused to get in. I stood in the doorway watching as she sat on a pile of old mismatched suitcases on the edge of the driveway. She looked small and defeated, her tracksuit looking cheap in the sunlight, her hair windblown. The neighbors were watching from their windows, drawn by the commotion. The woman who had obsessed over appearances, who had lived for status and the envy of others, was now a spectacle of ruin. I closed the heavy door, shutting out her wailing, and locked the deadbolt. The house was finally quiet. It was empty of furniture and empty of noise, but for the first time since I had walked down the aisle, it was full of peace. I knew Tiffany was walking the streets. The judge had granted her bail on compassionate grounds, citing her high-risk pregnancy and lack of prior criminal record. It was a miscarriage of justice that made my blood boil, but I knew it was temporary because desperation is a heavy coat to wear, and Tiffany had never been strong enough to carry weight. I left the office building late that Tuesday. The underground parking garage was quiet, the concrete pillars casting long shadows under the flickering fluorescent lights. My heels clicked rhythmically on the pavement, a sound that usually signaled power, but tonight felt like a countdown. I reached my car and reached for the handle, but a movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Tiffany stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. She looked nothing like the polished executive she had pretended to be. Her blonde hair was stringy and unwashed, her face gaunt and pale without makeup, and she was wearing a baggy hoodie that did little to hide the swell of her stomach. But it was what she held in her shaking hand that drew my attention. A small silver pistol pointed directly at my chest. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You ruined everything. I was going to be happy. I was going to be rich." I stood perfectly still, my hands slowly moving away from the car door. "You ruined yourself, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm. "I just showed the world who you really were. You stole. You lied. You betrayed the man who loved you." She took a step closer, the gun wavering in her grip. "Trey hates me," she sobbed. "He won't even take my calls. He filed for divorce yesterday. I have nothing, Zara. No money, no home, no family. And it is all your fault. If you had just stayed the stupid wife, none of this would have happened. I am going to kill you, and then I am going to disappear." She wasn't going to disappear. She was going to prison. I looked her in the eye, seeing the madness that had consumed her. "You are not going to shoot me, Tiffany," I said, "because you are a coward. You like to steal money from behind a computer screen. You like to manipulate men with lies, but you do not have the guts to pull that trigger." She let out a guttural scream and lunged forward, the gun raising higher. But she never got the chance to fire. A shadow detached itself from the darkness behind her. Mr. Biggs moved with a speed that belied his size. He grabbed Tiffany's wrist, twisting it sharply until the gun clattered to the floor. In one fluid motion, he spun her around and pinned her against the hood of my car, his hands securing her arms behind her back without hurting the baby. "I told you I owned the building," I said, walking over to pick up the gun and sliding it away with my foot. That includes the security team. Did you really think I would walk around unprotected knowing you were out there? Tiffany was screaming, thrashing against Biggs's hold, shouting obscenities that echoed through the garage. Minutes later, the sirens wailed again. This time there was no gala crowd to watch, only the cold gray walls of the garage. The police officers who arrived were less gentle than Biggs. They read her rights as they shoved her into the back of the cruiser, informing her that assault with a deadly weapon and violation of bail conditions meant she was going straight to maximum security. As the car drove away, I felt a pang of sorrow, not for her, but for the innocent life she carried. That baby would be born in a prison infirmary. And I knew what would happen next, because I had already spoken to Trey. He had refused to take a paternity test, but the timeline and the medical facts were enough for him. He wanted nothing to do with his brother's child, a living reminder of the double betrayal that had broken him. The baby would go into the system, a ward of the state, before it even took its first breath. It was the final tragedy of the Vance legacy, a dynasty that ended not with an heir, but with a foster care file number. I watched the taillights fade, and then I got into my car. There was still work to do. The sound of the jackhammer removing the chrome letters, Julian, from the marble wall of the lobby was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was a physical exorcism of a ghost that had haunted this building for too long. The dust settled on the floor, covering the expensive Italian tile Julian had installed to impress clients he intended to defraud. I walked through the debris, my heels clicking on the stone, stepping over the shattered remnants of his ego. I was not just cleaning the building, I was scrubbing the soul of the company. The rebrand was swift and brutal. Julian Tech was dead. In its place rose Phoenix Ventures. The name was a cliché, perhaps, but it was accurate. I had burned his legacy to the ground and built something stronger from the ash. My first act as the undisputed CEO was a purge. I walked through the executive floor with a stack of termination notices. The vice president of sales who had helped Julian expense his strip club visits as client entertainment was gone before lunch. The director of operations, who had looked the other way when inventory went missing, was escorted out by security, his box of personal effects looking pathetic in his arms. I fired the yes-men, the enablers, and the sycophants who had laughed at Julian's jokes while he robbed the pension fund, but the destruction was only half the work. I went to the basement archives and the back offices, finding the people Julian had buried. I found the brilliant data analyst named Marcus, who Julian had kept in an entry-level position for 5 years, simply because Marcus had once corrected Julian's math in a board meeting. I found the logistics expert named Sarah, who had been demoted to the mailroom for refusing to sign a false invoice. I brought them all up to the top floor. I gave them offices with windows. I gave them raises. I told them that competence was the new currency of this kingdom, and their eyes lit up with a hunger I recognized because it was the same hunger I felt. A week into the restructuring, there was a knock on my glass door. I looked up from a spreadsheet to see Trey standing there. He looked different. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and work boots. He looked tired, his face lined with the grief of losing a brother to prison and a wife to madness, but his eyes were clear for the first time in years. He did not walk in with the swagger of a board member. He stood at the threshold, hat in hand, waiting for permission. "Come in, Trey," I said, closing my laptop. He walked to the chair opposite my desk, but he did not sit. "I heard you are hiring," he said, his voice rough. "I am," I replied, leaning back. "But I am looking for executives, Trey, people with vision. You sat on a board that oversaw a massive fraud. Your resume is not exactly shining right now." "I do not want to be an executive," he said quickly. "I do not want to touch money. I do not want to make decisions. I just want to work." He looked down at his hands. "I want a job in the warehouse, loading trucks, packing boxes. I want to sweat Zara." I want to be too tired at the end of the day to think about him. Or her. I just want to start over from the bottom. I studied him. I saw the remorse radiating off him in waves. He was a victim too, but he was also a man who had benefited from the system that hurt me, even if he did it unknowingly. Penance was necessary. I picked up my phone and dialed the warehouse manager. "Mr. Henderson, I have a new recruit for you. His name is Trey. Start him on the night shift. Minimum wage. No benefits for the first 90 days. I hung up and looked at Trey. "You start tonight at 10. But listen to me very carefully, Trey. You are not my brother-in-law in that warehouse. You are employee number 402. One mistake, one missing inventory item, 1 minute late to your shift, and you are out. There are no second chances in Phoenix Ventures. Do you understand?" He nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Zara. Thank you for letting me earn it." He turned and walked out, and for the first time, I saw a man who might actually build something of his own one day. 3 months later, I sat in my office holding a glossy magazine. The cover of Forbes featured a woman in a white power suit, sitting on a throne of shipping crates, her gaze steel and her posture regal. The headline did not say Julian's wife. It did not say the heiress. It read "The Phoenix of Atlanta, Zara Vance, and the New Era of Ethical Capital." I traced the letters of my name. I had not just survived the fire, I had become the flame. I was the most powerful businesswoman in the state, and I had done it by cutting out the cancer that was holding me back. The empire was finally mine. The crisp autumn air of Paris felt different this time. It didn't smell of desperation or fake promises. It smelled of roasted chestnuts and freedom. I sat at a small wrought-iron table outside a bistro in Le Marais, watching the golden leaves drift down from the trees. A year had passed since the night I burned my old life to the ground, and the woman sipping her espresso now bore little resemblance to the one who had trembled in a penthouse monitoring a cheating husband. I was lighter, sharper, and infinitely richer. Across the table sat Mateo, a Spanish venture capitalist I had met at a summit in Davos. He was handsome in a way that didn't scream for attention, but commanded it. He was listening to me explain the logistical challenges of expanding Phoenix Ventures into the European market, and he wasn't looking at my legs or my bank account balance. He was looking at my mind. He was taking notes. He asked questions that challenged my assumptions, not my authority. It was intoxicating. For the first time in a decade, I felt the thrill of being seen not as a resource, but as a peer. My phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. It was an unknown number with a Georgia area code, but I knew who it was. I had been expecting this call. It was the anniversary of his sentencing. I picked up the phone, the screen displaying the notification, "Call from inmate at Federal Correctional Institution." Mateo looked at me, his brow furrowing in concern. "Do you need to take that?" he asked, his voice gentle. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Yes," I said. "Just for closure." I slid my finger across the screen, accepting the call. There was a crackle of static, and then a recorded voice announced that the call was being monitored. Then silence. I waited, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of the distance between us. Zara, his voice was a rasp, a shadow of the smooth baritone that used to charm investors. "It's Julian." I know, I said, sipping my espresso. "What do you want, Julian?" "I am in the middle of a meeting." "I just wanted to hear your voice," he said, sounding small. "I have been thinking a lot in here. About us. About everything. I am sorry, Zara. I truly am. I should have valued you. I should have listened to you. I was a fool." I looked across the table at Mateo, who was patiently waiting, respecting my space. I looked at the bustling street of Paris, the city Julian had sent me to so he could rob me. The irony was delicious. "You were a fool, Julian." I agreed, my voice devoid of anger or pity. "But you were also a teacher. You taught me that my value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see it. You taught me to trust my instincts. And you taught me to always read the fine print. Please. He whispered, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. Is there any chance? When I get out, could we maybe talk? I have changed, Zara. I have really changed. I laughed, a soft sound that mingled with the clinking of silverware and laughter of the cafe. People don't change, Julian, I said. They just get caught. And you got caught. There was a pause. A heavy silence filled with the ghosts of a marriage that had been a lie from the start. Then he spoke again, his voice breaking. I regret it every day. I regret losing you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of rain and old stone. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel triumph. I felt nothing. The cord was finally cut. Lo siento, no hablo con perdedores, I said, my Spanish flawless, my tone final. I heard his sharp intake of breath, the realization that I was speaking the language of his betrayal, the language he thought I couldn't understand. I didn't wait for a response. I tapped the red icon ending the call and blocking the number permanently. I placed the phone face down on the table. Is everything okay? Mateo asked, watching me closely. Everything is perfect, I said, picking up my wine glass. I was just taking out the last of the trash. He smiled, clinking his glass against mine. To new beginnings, then. To new beginnings, I echoed, and to reading the fine print. I took a sip of the rich red wine, looking out at the city of lights. I had walked through the fire and I had not burned. I had risen. And as I sat there in the city, he tried to exile me too. I realized the greatest revenge wasn't seeing him in prison. It was seeing myself free. Never underestimate the woman who holds the keys to the kingdom, especially when she built the castle herself. Zara's journey teaches us that one's value is never defined by those who lack the capacity to appreciate it. While betrayal is devastating, it often serves as a catalyst for discovering our own dormant strength. The story highlights the critical importance of financial independence and legal foresight. Blind trust is a vulnerability, but preparedness is a weapon. Zara didn't just survive the dismantling of her marriage. She used the debris to build a stronger foundation. Ultimately, we learn that true power lies not in revenge, but in the self-respect to demand what we deserve and the courage to walk away when it isn't given. If Zara's ultimate victory inspired you to take back your power, hit that like button and subscribe for more satisfying stories of justice served cold.